Welcome to this extraordinary meeting of the Council. Before we start, I would like to outline the usual housekeeping arrangements. If you wish to speak, please can you indicate clearly and that if you wish to do so to the Chair or the Vice Chair. Thank you. Please can you stand when addressing the Council. To enable your microphone, please press the middle button, which will turn green, and the microphone, which will light up red at the top. Please also remember to press the middle button when you have finished speaking. It is particularly important that all members use their microphones so that the audio can be picked up for the live stream on the Council's YouTube channel. I would like to politely remind all members that due to the nature of the Council's camera and microphone tracking system, it is possible that you may appear on camera at times when you may not necessarily be addressing the Council. For example, when the cameras are panning across the room or a colleague in your vicinity is speaking. Please be mindful of this at all times and act appropriately, including with the use of your mobile phones, which should be on silent. Thank you. Moving on, are there any apologies for absence?
Yeah, apologies, Chair, from Councillors Banks, Blackwell, Corney, Hunt, Jennings, Patrick Cadware and Tevlin.
Thank you. Item number 1, members' interest. Sorry. Oh, sorry. I have
Kevin Golson.
Councillor Taylor.
Apologies from Councillor Terry too.
And yes. You've got that? Yeah. Okay, thank you. Nobody else? Right, thank you. Okay, item number 1, members' interests. Are there any interests that members would like to declare in relation to the gender item this evening? No, thank you. Item number 2, local government reorganisation in Cambridgeshire and Peterborough. Before I invite the Executive Leader to introduce this item, I propose that Council Procedure Rule 13, Rules of Debate, be suspended for the duration of the discussion of this item, and at such time the common law rules of debate be observed by members to allow a full discussion on the item, as this is a debate and not a decision-making forum. Can I invite the Executive Leader, Councillor Conboy, to present the report on local government reorganisation in Cambridgeshire and Peterborough? The decision to finalise the proposed letter to the government as an interim submission to government is a matter for confirmation by the Cabinet and will be convened at the conclusion of this council meeting. And so members are invited to comment on the proposals at this stage and note the letter to be submitted. There is no decision to be taken by the council this evening. Thank you. May I invite Councillor Conboy to speak? Thank you.
You may, Chair. Would you please excuse me? I'm not going to stand this evening because I don't think I could quite manage it. I'm recovering, but the knee's still quite not straight yet. Thank you very much, Council. Apologies for bringing you together for an extraordinary meeting, but I promised you that I would engage with you as we go through local government reorganisation. Before us tonight is a draft letter that we are hoping that we will be able to then submit to the Minister, who has asked for expressions of interest by those authorities who are ready to agree to move towards local government reorganisation. You'll know, because I've briefed you as members, I have briefed our towns and parishes, and some of you have joined those sessions, and you've had FAQs and lots of information. You will know that we are at the start of a process. This is the kick-off, if you like, to say to government that we would like to do local government reorganisation and that we would like to own that process rather than being directed by the Minister, which is an option that could happen. and that we would like to indicate that there is an agreement across Cambridgeshire and Peterborough's authorities to move towards further work that would mean that by November, which is the next deadline the Minister has advertised, we would be in a position to express our views about options that we might favour for local government reorganisation. That process requires us to do quite a lot of data crunching, and we've commissioned some data work across all of our authorities within the patch so that we have some consistent data. It will take quite a lot of work and thinking through from members, from officers, to get to a point where we are looking at our options and deciding on preferred options, but that's some distance away. I think it would be fair to say that tonight 52 of us, I know not everybody's here, but 52 councillors are likely to have 52 different versions of how they think we might do this in the future. We are not making that, we're not at that stage, but actually we have got a process to go through that equally the Minister has set the expectation that we would engage with the public. The Minister hasn't given us an indication about how we might do that, so that's another challenge to work our way through. But there will clearly be lots of views, there will be lots of impassioned views about why certain configurations will be good for certain communities and not so good for others, but that's some distance off. Can I remind you that tonight we have a letter and Cabinet will meet after this. Importantly, that letter is deliberately written in a way not to be specific about what configurations we may look at, simply because it gives us then the option to do that in longer time. It's a letter that meets most of the aspirations of the Minister, although the Minister had invited that if you were further down the deliberations, you might like to provide far more information. Across the leaders on behalf of the organisations that are signing up to that letter, and some of them have already met in council already. I think South Cambs is meeting in parallel to us now. Effectively, we would like to try and submit a letter that simply says we're all on the same page. Fenland has gone further than that and has in fact added an extra couple of sentences because there is one particular option it feels very strongly it does not wish to consider. But actually we will have an election for one of our partners in May. County Council will have an election. And actually not being specific at this stage about what's on the table and what's not is actually probably a more comfortable place that the remaining leaders are all quite comfortable to not rule things out, not rule things in. The other thing to say to you is that tonight, as with all of our partner councils who have been going through this process and some still have to meet, I think one of our real challenges is we will probably want to partner with somebody, with a council. I'm not saying we won't, as in that we will do this entirely on our own, but we may want to. Can I just remind you tonight that if you do decide to express a view, that you are thoughtful about how you do that, because the last thing we want to do is express a view and then discover that that's the partner that we might end up partnering. So can I just remind you, please, to be a little bit thoughtful if you do want to get into that sort of territory. I think that's probably it for now. I'm conscious I may need to come back in at varying points because I'm guessing there may be points of clarification, and equally we've got a chief exec who's been involved in a number of these discussions who may also offer up points of clarification if they're needed. But I think, Chair, I'm going to hand back to you. I'm really interested to hear what Council has to say, and we will take that through then into Cabinet when we reconvene in this meeting, in this room, from 8 o'clock. Later, if the debate goes on for a significant amount of time, but I suspect Council may not decide it needs all of that time. But I'll hand back to you, Chair, to see what others have to say, and I shall listen intently.
Thank you, Councillor Conboy. Okay, may I invite members to speak, please, on this item? So, yes. Oh, Councillor. Yeah, it's all right, yeah.
Thank you, Chair. I'm
Yeah.
a little bit taken back to get in first, but I'm probably unique on this council and possibly in Cambridgeshire, and I'll tell you the reason why I say that. And that is because I was actually involved in the previous reorganisation at Cambridgeshire County Council, and which took place in 72 and 74. And in 1976, I was involved, I worked at Cambridgeshire County Council sorting out the mess. And I also had a relative who was on the St Neots Urban District Council and the shadow council for this authority originally. So from those sort of things, I've got quite a feel, I feel, for local government reorganisation and what the pitfalls are. In 1987, we had Colin Meadowcroft joined us as the legal officer of this council. And Colin was doing, I think he spent a year or so regularising the transactions that related back to 72, 74. And I think that whoever the council is that we decide we want to partner with, we need to be very wary that it's not just a question of saying we'll partner with another council, but also how we fit together as a jigsaw. And all of the councils have different structures and different ways of working and different priorities. So I think that we need to be wary of that. I also want to raise one last point before I sit down, and that is I'm particularly concerned about this as a St Neots councillor, because Bedfordshire has a tremendous number of houses, tens of thousands of houses being built effectively as adjoining St Neots at Little Barford, Chawston, Wyberston, and we also have housing in St Neots. So had this reorganisation not taken place, within a few years the area would have been big enough to have become a borough council on its own. So I think that we need to actually consider how that will affect St Neots and how the discussions go with Bedfordshire about that. And I can see the leaders nodding. I have already had this discussion with her, but I thought I would raise this at full council. Thank you. Sorry to talk so long.
Thank you. Our Chief Executive would like to speak. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Chapman. I thought it would be helpful to update all of members. We touched on this during our LGR briefings, but I want to give you an assurance that we are already thinking about some of those work streams. Councillor Chapman makes a very good point that if you don't start planning what we would refer to as due diligence in terms of such things as contracts, making sure we know when those contracts are due to end, knowing what's going on across the whole of the county, actually. So there are key work streams that we are already in-house for HDC through our very small project group, identifying and looking at when we would bring those on stream in terms of activity. But we are also at our chief execs meetings talking about that come the autumn, where we may then have more clarification as to whom our likely partners will be, that rather than wait for the shadow boards to be created, which would be another year to 18 months, we would start to bring together officer cohorts to start aligning back to common elements around procurement and IT being the really big one in terms of procurement and apps, etc. But also some of those other common courses of work where we could start to be proactively streamlining. Because if we think about one of the, and again, you will know that I'm being apolitical here, one of the purposes of reorganisation is to deliver efficient and effective services. Good pre-planning will help us deliver that for our communities rather than waiting until the last minute, because actually on day one of the new unitary, the phrase that you will all get to hear over the next 3 years is legal and safe. And the priorities of the new unitary will be around ensuring that those services that, if they are not delivered on day one to that standard, could lead to harm. Other services that don't have that same level of risk will not be such a priority. So it's important that we get the bedwing in and that work programme in early doors. And again, actually, it feeds into our corporate plan, our corporate peer challenge update and actions. And it's also just really good practice in terms of efficient and effective delivery of services, which is one of our corporate priorities. So it all does come to fruition. But Councillor Chapman makes a very, very good point in terms of some of those previous issues and lessons to be learnt and be more pragmatic and forward thinking. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Councillor Bywater, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. Evening, members. I just want to express my deep concerns about the speed at which government expects councils to implement the proposed reforms outlined in the white paper. While we all recognise the need for greater efficiency and collaboration in local government, the pace of this reform feels dangerously rushed, with many critical questions, many critical questions left unanswered. The Chief Executive at the County Council recently highlighted that the transition costs could cost in the region of £80 million. Where is this money coming from? I know we've squirreled away £1 million, but where will it be funded centrally, or will it fall on already stretched local authorities like ourselves and the others in the county? We've been asked to restructure at a time when councils are grappling with significant financial challenges, including historic deficits for some. Some councils have healthy reserves like ourselves, while others are on the brink of financial crisis. How will this reform account for such disparities? I know certainly residents in Huntingdonshire potentially probably don't want to give money to maybe central Peterborough or somewhere else within the county. And then, of course, there's the human impact. The reality of local government restructuring is often redundancies and job losses. Let's not beat around the bush. This will potentially happen. And people have moved to this district to engage employment, to move here, make it their home. And we must consider that. We must ask what safeguards are going to be in place for our dedicated council staff, and how will frontline services be protected during this upheaval, because there's a huge upheaval taking place here. And I will, of course, support the council's letter, as I did at the county council yesterday, because I'm a double hatter. But we must acknowledge that we are still in the very, very early stage of this process. I can already see many more extraordinary meetings taking place in the next couple of years while we navigate the complexities of what lies ahead. And as a word of warning to you all, Cambridgeshire County Council has spent over the last 5 years trying to get a sniff of interest and sell the old Shire Hall. This is one local government building that's taken eternity to try and get rid of, let alone tackling the local government reform and the immense challenges this is going to bring us. So just let that sink in as we go through this process. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ross Martin.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'd like to start off, I wish I could, obviously there's no vote tonight, but I wish I could stand up and say that I wouldn't be supporting this letter, because I do fear that the approach that's being taken in Cambridgeshire and Peterborough does open us up to a huge amount of risk. In what I'm about to say, I've sort of split it out into 3 sections, which I think is going to be helpful. So a bit of an overview on local government reorganisation, a little bit about the proposed response, and then a little bit on the next steps and how I'd like to see this organisation move forward. Now, I'm sure across this chamber we'll all be in agreement that there needs to be some kind of change. The system that we've currently got doesn't work as well as what it could do. Is it perfect? No. Is it completely broken? Also no. But change is very much needed. But the approach of the current Labour government is far from ideal. A one-size-fits-all solution doesn't really take into account the unique challenges that we have. But more importantly, it doesn't take in the unique opportunities and strengths that our communities have in Huntingdonshire and across Cambridgeshire and Peterborough. And quite frankly, it's a bit of a travesty. But government has told us that we have to jump off this cliff of LGR, and very soon we'll be required by law to jump. I've heard from many members across this chamber and also across the area on how they would do things differently. And most of those voices have said they wouldn't do it this way. Some have some really good ideas, quite frankly, some less so. But we're all in agreement that what the government is doing doesn't fit with the area that we've got. So I recognise the reason that we're doing what we are tonight, but I wish we could have gone a little bit further in trying to push back. The white paper was as clear as mud, and it was muddied. It was made more muddy by the rumour mill, some saying that they had the ear of government, and a general lack of clarity from MHCLG. What the government is clear on, however, is that they are hell-bent on getting something done come hell or high water. There were many references in the report about what the law will currently allow and what it won't allow. But also, as it also says in the report, there is going to have to be some kind of change in law for LGR to take place, because there currently isn't legislation which allows local government reorganisation or the merging of councils to take place. So I think all cards are, to some extent, still on the table, as much as the white paper has set out some options. So on to our response. At the start of the response, it's to the government, it says that we are unique because we are the only two-tier area that already has a devolution deal. Unfortunately, we are no longer unique because the East Midlands has the exact same issue as we have, just on a much bigger scale. The Local Government and Public Involvement in Health Act 2007 states that the government may only invite councils to consider reorganisation, but not to instruct them. That seems to be the reason why we've put forward this letter today. But let's not kid ourselves. The government are going to do this one way or the other. They may have called it an invitation, but it was anything but optional. This government has a habit of not being clear on details, but they are clear on the broader vision of LGR. It is comply or be forced into compliance. Out of the 21 areas that received a letter from Jim McMahon, only one other and us refused to offer the government what they wanted. So us and one other out of 21 other areas across England. We must ask ourselves, who do you think the government are going to focus on? They're going to focus on the ones that didn't put forward an interim plan that they requested. So if our aim is to avoid being dictated to, this approach risks the exact opposite. I've taken time to read all the other examples of the interim plans for the other 19 councils. Some are very detailed and very far along. Some are very brief. But the common trait that they all have is they all answer every single one of the questions that the government have given councils. So why are we any different? If 19 areas out of 21 are able to put forward a basic idea of an interim plan, which government have said is not the final plan, is not the be-all and end-all, it can change, and they accept that there are local government elections this year, why in this area are we not able to do the same? Why are we part of the two that are not responding how government have asked us to? So in the report in front of us tonight, we have some of the information that government has requested, like the risks locally of LGR. But this has been omitted from the response that goes to government. Government asked directly for us to let them know what the risks are to our area and to our council. They're in the report, the work has already been done, but it's been omitted from the response that we're giving to government. Why? How is this going to help us moving forward? How is this going to support us? How is this going to ensure that the government can help us out along the way if there are things that they are able to do throughout this process? This is not the response I was expecting to be talking about today. And although I appreciate why this decision has been made, I'm more than concerned about the potential implications this will have on our autonomy during the LGR process. So moving forward, the leader has said that we must take a data-driven approach. And quite frankly, that's music to my ears. I think that's the right way to do things. But what data are we going to use? How are we going to apply it? What weight are we going to give to the different factors? These questions should have been addressed in the response to the government. Then there's the question of viability. What does viability even mean in this context? Are we talking about financial viability? If so, how are we going to calculate that? Are we talking about social viability? If so, how are we going to judge those factors and metrics? What about political viability? Is that even going to be considered? Is that going to be part of the decision-making process? If so, how? If not, why not? The emphasis is understandably on financial viability, but local government financing needs to change to make any authority viable. Price Waterhouse and Cooper have said that over 5 years, local government will save 2.6 billion if we all 21 areas created a whole unitary authority. To put that in context, the current national annual SEND deficit across England is 8 billion. The deficit for adult social care is well over 10 billion. So that 2.8 billion is a drop in the ocean, quite frankly. And those are just best guesses at the moment. It could be more, it could be less. And that is if everyone goes for single unitary authorities. Now, I'm not a huge fan of the single huge unitary authority because that is moving the decisions further and further away from local residents. We're doing that already through local government reorganisation. Doing a whole county area pushes the decision-making even further away. Surely any new authority will be set up to fail unless the issues are fixed first. And as the old saying goes, the bigger they are, the harder they fall. If something goes wrong in these new authorities, it's going to be people's lives at stake. So we need to be very, very conscious of that. It's all well and good talk about financial viability based on current stats. We need some real change in government finance for viability to be a reality. Then how are we going to consider external assessments in determining our viability? As I said, PwC analysis presented a clear financial picture. If all 21 areas created a whole unitary areas, we would save 2.8 billion over 5 years. If each area split into 2, we would save 707 million. If we split up into 3, however, there'd be a £700 million loss across the whole country. How are we going to argue against such figures as this when the financial case of viability, when we're making a financial case of viability, if we do not set out our own process on how we're going to use a data-driven approach? Do the cost savings outweigh the social and political considerations? I don't believe so. If we do not address these questions in a structured and strategic manner, we will risk having our fate decided for us. That is what I thought we'd be discussing tonight. So to conclude, Mr. Chairman, local government reorganisation is necessary, but the process is flawed. By refusing to engage in the invitation, we're potentially giving up the opportunity to shape the future of our local government. If we want to ensure that we are not done too, then we should have taken a proactive approach. We should have presented our data, defined viability on our terms, and made a compelling evidence-based case for potential options like the 19 out of 21 other two-tier areas. Let's not be the ones that gets dictated to. This was our chance to act now before the decision is made for us. Instead, we are in the hands of the current Labour government. Scary, I know.
Thank you. Councillor Gray, please.
Thank you very much, Chair, and I will not have as much data to my fingertips, but if the council will indulge me to make a few remarks, because this is really important. This is going to affect the future of this council, which is looking like it's going to be disappearing into history, even if it becomes something, whether it becomes something large or something slightly smaller. And I do regret really the high-handed, frankly, manner that the government are going about doing this and the speed at which they're trying to push this through. And, you know, I think we've known for a long time that this government is no friend of county councils, and we're seeing the outcome of that. They're determined to get rid of them. So, but we've got to be pragmatic. You know, that's the time frame that's out there. I may disagree with it violently, and I may think it could be done far better and far more sensitively. But the reality is the time frame has been set by the minister, and the minister will stick to it. And that is why I feel very strongly that the comments just made by Councillor Martin are, I'm afraid, absolutely correct. Because when I read this letter, they say that a camel is a committee designed by a horse designed by a committee, and I'm afraid that's what this letter looks like. The signatories underneath them, all very worthy people, but it's a committee that's put this letter together, and the letter, frankly, is just a holding pattern. And all of the issues that Councillor Martin has raised, I think we are very much at risk of frankly, the letter doesn't say anything other than we're really passionate about doing this, but it doesn't really say anything. And I think that's what worries me, is that I really did think, Leader, that we would be talking about something far more substantive than this when we met this evening. This is simply a holding pattern, and I'm very worried about it. So it sort of flies in the face. I did write down one of the comments that you made, which is about owning our process. I'd argue that this is not owning our process. This is allowing the government pretty much free rein, particularly in the light of the comments that have been made about so many other areas having come forward with rather more substantive and constructive responses than this. Let's be honest that despite Councillor Chapman's best endeavours, 1972 was not a perfect reorganisation. Oh, right, okay, so sorry, I withdraw that comment, Chair. You know, because we did see a situation where, you know, lots of sort of urban and rural districts were put together in districts, and then the counties were kind of, some of the counties in our case were merged and all that kind of thing. And so I think as we think to the future, let's not think that the district that we have here is a perfect representation of what our communities look like. And I've seen some nods at various references to, you know, the giant size, frankly, of Cambridgeshire and Peterborough as a whole area. I mean, the idea that we have a lot in common with one another, I think is, you know, this is not Manchester. This is not Birmingham. We've got two cities that are very, very different from each other. I go to Cambridge for my luxury leisure, you know, 5 times a year. I can about afford to go there. You know, Peterborough, apologies, Peterboreans that are listening, I drive past. I never know where Whittlesea, Marton and Chatteris are, but they are, they're there somewhere. And when it comes to, you know, when it comes to Wisbech, I can get to central London faster. So it's a giant area, both in geographic size, in spread of social sort of makeup, but also in terms of population. And we know from the local plan that population growth is definitely on the agenda here. So whatever those numbers say now, they're going to be a lot bigger by the time this comes to fruition, and they're going to be bigger still as we live through the process of it. So that's my single comment that I'll make about the about sort of structure and what it might look like going forward. I do worry that this looks like it may delay our own democratic arrangements next year. You know, I was obviously keen that in 2026, the people of Huntingdonshire would have another opportunity to express how they thought this district council should be made up. Nobody voted for a joint administration, and some of you have implemented things that you didn't campaign on. And I'm very keen that in 2026, this authority and the people of this authority have an option to express that. So I do hope that whatever happens, we're not in a world where we're delaying the 26 elections and actually it's 2028 before a new council with new councillors kind of comes through the process. So, Chair, thank you for your indulgence, well, Council, thank you for your indulgence in listening to me. But I do feel, as the Cabinet go away from this and consider this letter, be wary about being one of only two that is basically saying nothing.
Thank you. Councillor Corley.
Thank you, Chair. I won't take long because most of the points I wanted to make have already been made by my colleagues. Thanks, guys. But yeah, like my colleagues, I was disappointed to see that we were here tonight to discuss a holding letter, which is primarily what it is. My concern, which has been voiced by others, is having missed that 21st of March deadline to actually outline what we might think we might do, and it was quite clear it didn't have to be all detail, are we opening ourselves up to being told rather than allowing ourselves to frame that? And my question really for the leader is, in the various discussions around the table with the other leaders, was that consideration even thought about, that we were opening ourselves up potentially to an issue? I know you touched briefly on the fact that Fenland has not joined the group in signing this letter. Is it possible to share a little more information as to what, or is that totally off the table at the moment? Thank you.
Councillor Conboy, would you like to reply?
I was going to say, shall I come back and just answer the question as much as I can? Obviously, the conversations with leaders are confidential, but it's a cross-party set of conversations. So, you know, there's a wide representation in that room as leaders on behalf of their organisations, and bearing in mind that actually all of us are going through processes with our own councils. So we have a real challenge about practicalities about what you can agree as leaders when you haven't equally come back and had that conversation back with your own administration. So that's a practical challenge we're working through. Certainly, as a group of leaders, we didn't believe we were going to be disadvantaged with the sort of letter that we're putting in. The benefit of hindsight is actually we didn't see anybody else's letters, so they're starting to become available now. Actually, if we'd known what everybody else was going to do, we may well have had a different sort of discussion. But certainly leaders felt that the letter that we're putting in gives government a clear message that we are going to do this. I might say that we have a particular challenge around our area because we know that government is already very, very focused on Cambridge. That will come as no surprise to any of you. You know there's a number of initiatives being announced by the previous administration and then being announced by this administration nationally. So we're also very mindful that that's in play at the same time as the rest of us are also thinking about what happens in the wider area. So I don't think we will be disadvantaged, is my genuine view. But certainly, I think if I had come tonight and said 7 leaders have made a decision about how we think we should reorganise and you hadn't been involved in that and we hadn't engaged with our residents, equally I suspect there would have potentially been angst that we were running too fast, given we're already concerned that we're running very, very fast and the timetable has only been an announcement on December the 16th, and yet here we are on the 19th of March being asked to make some sort of decision. So leaders were very comfortable that this was the pragmatic response because they've agreed that in principle we will reorganise, but didn't want to be bounced into committing what that should be. So that we are really in a catch-22. Those organisations that have committed, we will, I suspect, as a group of leaders, look carefully to why they felt they could do that. And it may well be because actually there are fewer options, or perhaps those conversations were already further developed. But certainly those conversations were new to us from December in this area. So therefore, we started from a cold start in December, bearing in mind that everybody expected devolution to be in there. Nobody expected local government reorganisation. So we are where we are. I don't think we're at disadvantage, but I certainly will take that back to leaders, because leaders were very clear we did not wish to be disadvantaged. We are trying to get on the front foot with this and not be on the back foot. So I certainly will take that back. And it will be interesting to see what's emerged from the other discussions that are happening in parallel. The catch-22 is trying to get a letter that everybody is comfortable with at this stage is incredibly challenging. Some authorities, some of the areas are 2 or 3 leaders. We are 7. So the bigger the group of you that you've got to align, the different political views, the geography you've got to align, makes some of that challenging. But I take those points on board and will be reflecting those back. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Alban, please.
Thank you, Chair. At the risk of trying to out-local Councillor Chapman, who's been around a little bit longer than me, I was round at my mum's at the weekend looking at some of the paperwork from the house that I was born in and grew up in. And my granddad had applied for a grant to the then St Neots Rural District Council. And that required that grant being signed off by 2 councillors in those days. My swimming certificates up in the loft are from the old Huntingdon Peterborough Education Committee. So I think what I'm drawing attention to is the fact that local government changes, and we all accept that. I accept some of Councillor Conboy's reassurances. Getting seven leaders to agree and work under pressure that perhaps other areas aren't under, I don't suppose has been easy. And I do regret we're in the position we are in, not just in Huntingdonshire, but colleagues across the country who are in the position that we're in. There's 2 concerns that I have that I'll mention briefly. The first one is that have been brought to my attention in some of my parishes, that the parish councils that I've spoken to, some of them fear that local government will be ever less local. That even in the age of modern technology, particularly the smaller parish councils they'll feel even more remote from the centre of power and the centre of decision making. On the plus point, one council last night I was at said they would quite like to take on more powers at a lower level, and they would talked about in terms of trees and planning permission around tree work. So I would suggest, if it's possible, I know it's mentioned in the report that parish councils are outside of the scope, but the very fact that it's mentioned in the report, I think it's something that I would like to see us raised. I'm imagining, although I wouldn't presume to speak for St Ives and St Neots and Ramsey, that the bigger town councils might have even more ambition to take on roles because they have perhaps have the capacity to do so. My other concern is a broader one, that if a council gets bigger and the meetings go to daytime and they're held on a bigger area, it makes it remote, we will disenfranchise, or the government will disenfranchise, large sectors of the population for standing for local council. And my concern is that local councils will be made up disproportionately of older members of the community, retired members of the community, the wealthy, full-time political hacks, and they will be ever less representative of the young marrieds, of the single parents who would love to get involved and can't because they can't justify giving up time during the day, and the money isn't there in allowances enough for them to do it full time. So I think that's something I would like to raise as well. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Hassel.
Thank you, Chair. I guess councillors wouldn't be surprised to say that I'm advocating a risk-based approach to deciding this situation. I think that trying to come to a political solution, and I think in the note that I sent to everyone, because it's very difficult to make all your points in these kind of sessions. So I'm hoping that Cabinet have had chance to review my comments there. I think this is a very, very difficult situation that we're in. I think that there is opportunity. I think a lot of the political risks, I think is a bit of an elephant in the room. I think trying to get agreement, as we know from the combined authority and the issues that have occurred in the past, there's a lot of differing political opinions, which is why I think we need to have a much more dispassionate way of arriving at the boundaries, to look at some very key criteria. And I think that residents are important. I would hate it for our residents to come out of this and not really understand how we arrived if we were merging with one part of local government or another. So if we're aligned with Peterborough, aligned with Cambridge, or aligned with Fenland, if our residents don't know how we got there, I think that's a huge problem. And overall, I think one of the weaknesses in the letter is that I accept the fact that it's actually quite difficult for us to come to agreement amongst all these different parties. But I think if I was sitting as Secretary of State, I think I would want to know how we're going to reach a decision. How is it that we are going to join with one? We've got other, I think as mentioned, there are other authorities who have already decided how they want to divvy up. And I think we are at risk, I think Councillor Conboy made the point in terms of the government is very interested in Cambridge and that arc. So are we, my fear is that potentially we might be playing into the hands of people who want to pull the strings. And then my final point is, in the letter, I very much think we should be asking the government how they would, what criteria would they use in order to decide? So they're sort of saying, you decide yourself, but how are they going to decide if we just say, actually, this is all very difficult for us, how would you do it? So I think that's an important point to make. I think it's very difficult because we're having this meeting directly before the Cabinet meeting, so I'm kind of assuming that Cabinet are just going to go with the letter anyway. So I guess my sort of slight challenge is how can we influence this? But thank you, Chair.
Councillor Gledo.
Thank you, Chair. 2 points, actually. I want to address Councillor Gray. As part of the joint administration, I want to extend how well I've enjoyed working with members of the opposition and how helpful you've been in our time here, so thank you. The other point actually I wanted to make was actually been addressed by Councillor Hassel and Councillor Martin. I think the whole evaluation point is very important, because how can you make a decision unless you actually know what criteria you're actually going to be using in terms of how to evaluate the various models, and we haven't actually seen any sight of that type of modelling, so I think that's actually an important thing that has to be addressed. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Hodgson-Jones, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've been listening quite intently to the debate, and I'd like to pick up on a few points. Councillor Hassel, as usual with his risk-based approach, has hit on some of the key risks. And the final comment you made about, has the decision already been made? If Cabinet is immediately after this council meeting, and the letter has to be sent before the end of the week, and it's a joint letter agreed amongst 7 or 8 different councils, then what is the purpose of this meeting other than to inform us? Because we can't change the letter, because even if Cabinet agreed to change the letter, they then need to go and get the agreement of the other councillors who are co-signatories to this letter. So I think we are being railroaded into the process, which is symptomatic of the entire approach of the government has taken on local government reform, which is to rush things through. Don't worry, just get it done quickly. And that's not good enough. But I have a second concern, and it's to do with how do you get the agreement on the letter. The letter itself is incredibly weak. I cannot believe that several district leaders and council leaders got together and put together something so weak. And it's not good enough to say that there are different political parties, different circumstances. There are counties that have far more councils in them, and they have still been able to put together a detailed response. Nobody was asking us to say, this is what we want and this is how we're going to do it. What the government was asking was, what are the issues that you're going to look at? And those issues don't change because we're in favour or not in favour of the reform. They are issues that need to be looked at. And when you look at Cambridgeshire and Peterborough, and you say, what is a suitable structure for Cambridgeshire and Peterborough? One of the things that we can say, and I think council leaders should have said, is that we don't think it's sensible to have a single unitary to cover the entire county and Peterborough. And this doesn't say that. Then you have a choice of, do you have 2 or 3 districts, and how do you divvy up the county? And it doesn't take a genius to work out that if the government has put forward a target population of roughly 500,000 as its minimum, that you can only split Cambridgeshire and Peterborough into 2 unitaries. You can't split it into 3 because all 3 would then be too small and not viable. So why has that not been addressed in this letter? And then the other thing that we have to look at is, where is the role of the mayor in this? He's not a signatory to this letter. Where is the combined authority in this? Because if you look at it, Cambridgeshire and Peterborough together, by the government's definition, is actually too small to be a strategic authority. So why has there been no outreach to other counties and other areas, and why are they not being involved in the process? And as we heard, St Neots, and I happen to know because my father told me when he used to live in St Neots, that he had somebody in his office who'd been there a long time, hadn't moved house, and had lived in 3 different local authorities. Okay, so I understand that St Neots is a big hub, and I drive past it frequently. I don't often go there these days, other than when the train line's broken, but I go past it frequently, and I can see all of the new development on both sides of the county boundary. And the logic for Huntingdonshire to work with Bedfordshire to find a proper strategic basis for that is something that should have been looked at. So my question to the leader is, in your discussions with other group leaders, other council leaders, have you talked about talking to adjoining counties? Have you talked about the possibility of merging across county boundaries? And have you considered the feasibility of extending the remit of the mayoralty so that it is a strategic authority that has some genuine strategic regional power? Because as it is, if we had a single unitary authority based on the county and a strategic mayor above, what on earth is the point of the mayor? And that's just a waste of money. So there are a lot of things that could have been addressed, but I do find that this response is extremely weak and it hasn't dealt with the issues. And I'll just pick up one because it struck me in the letter where, sorry, just need to pick up the thing. In the final paragraph on page 30, it mentions that we are focused on ensuring that any proposals ensure that any future unitaries are financially sound. This may require us to look at boundary changes for districts, although this is not our preference. Now, this is just another point that shows that the leaders in their preparation of this letter have not given thought to what the minister has asked, because the ministerial guidance specifically says that the building block should be existing district councils, and changing boundaries is one surefire way of not only not complying with what the government has asked, but leading you into a massive quagmire, as Councillor Chapman suggested, and as Councillor Orban has mentioned, because it would be impossible to divvy up all of the assets when you start making boundary changes in the time frame. Now, the government has set a ridiculously fast timetable for this, but we know why that is. It's because they want to leave their mark, and they obviously, despite their majority in Parliament, have absolutely no confidence that they're going to be returned in 2028. So clearly, what I'm saying is that I don't understand why the leaders have come up with such a weak response, why Fenland is missing, and why the mayor has not even been mentioned in this process. And what are we going to do? And if the reality is, as Councillor Hassel has suggested, that there's going to be a cabinet meeting immediately after this, which will approve the letter, and the letter will get sent, because frankly, I don't see that if it's taken however many weeks to get to this inadequate, limp response, that we're suddenly going to get to a more substantive response in the remaining time. And I think that that is really sad. And what we have done is left ourselves open. We are no longer going to be part of the process. We are going to be done to. And we're going to be done to in ways that we don't want, by people who don't give a damn about us.
Councillor Conboy.
I'll respond because you asked me a direct question. So the reason that the letter does not talk about the boundaries is because that's part of the devolution discussion. So we're being clear, there's local government reorganisation, and then beside that there is also a devolution discussion. I have been very clear on the briefings I've given to members that actually we have been talking to partners around our boundaries. That does include Bedfordshire. I know that other colleagues have spoken to other neighbouring authorities. The challenge is some of them have already reorganised, and therefore government has been clear they will not reorganise them twice. Some of those are partway through those discussions, and you'll know how difficult it is when you do a boundary review. As soon as you start moving one piece of the jigsaw, the potential is you cause a problem somewhere else. So the reason the letter doesn't talk about that in any great detail is because actually that's a piece of work that's still unfolding. Are we talking to them? Yes, because we'd be daft not to. And in fact, actually, if anything, it's given us a fantastic opportunity to have conversations we probably weren't having as frequently as we could have done. So that's why it's silent on that. It's specifically silent on the mayor and the mayoralty role, simply because the combined authority is not reorganising. So everybody assumes that that will stay the same, as in it'll become a upper tier strategic mayoral authority in time. But the reason that the mayor is not a signature is because actually he's not one of the organisations that will reorganise. So it's not that we haven't got mayoral support for this, it's simply these are the leaders of the councils who are signing. I take the comments about whether the letter is weak, and I've heard that a number of times this evening. It is a letter that you had that 7 leaders could agree. I have already been very clear. Fenland insisted it wanted to add 2 extra sentences. In fact, I could be honest, I haven't got it in front of me, so I don't know if it's 2 or 3 sentences, but about the notion of a full unitary. I've already been clear this evening that we will have an election for county council and we will have a new administration. We are very mindful that in that democratic process, a new administration has not yet had the opportunity to be part of the conversations that have had since December. So there is a catch-22 here. Whilst we may have a view, I'm not going to say what that view is, but leaders may have views about how that would do. Actually, quite rightly, we are also minded that we have a democratic process which is unfolding around us, and in May there will be a new administration that equally will want to come to the table and will have its own view. So that's a bit of a challenge, which is why many of us felt that rather than be clear about what's not an option on the table, because we haven't specified the other options, we wouldn't put that in either. I hear the concern about the fact that because it's non-specific, you believe that we've missed a trick. I think that's an interesting perception. That's not the perception that the leaders had going in to prepare the letter. They genuinely did not believe that. But as I say, the hindsight is we didn't see what everybody else's letters look like. So we are perhaps at a disadvantage for that, if that's your belief. Certainly the conversations being had with civil servants, I hope, will stress that actually there is a desire to reorganise. We just want the time to actually do a valid piece of work. And I've heard all the concerns tonight around, you know, how will we make that decision? How will we use the data? What criteria? It's hard enough agreeing a unified position across 7 authorities. We could not have got to a point where we agreed all of the criteria in that timescale too, because I suspect you will have different criteria even across this chamber, and I think that might be right and proper to have a robust discussion around what should the criteria be and how should we determine that, and then we would equally have that different views across our partner organisations. There may be quite a lot of similarities, we're just simply not in that stage. Even commissioning the data is not a quick exercise. The data has been commissioned, but it's taking time to come back in. It's also taking time for different partners to provide different data, and then that will need to be interrogated at significant length to be clear that we're all looking at the same data that's telling us the same things. So you can imagine that in itself is not a quick process. So I take on board. I do just want to come back on the specifics around the fact that Cabinet will meet after this. We have a logistical challenge that all of us as authorities wanted to make sure we went back and involved all of our members in our home authorities. All leaders felt really strongly that that was the case. We have a practical thing about timescales for doing that. We've effectively crammed all of that into this week. So somewhere at the end of last week, and the last one I think is tomorrow. But we've had to cram it into a very, very tight timescale and still do due process because we have to advertise meetings. We have to go through all of that appropriately. Cabinet meeting afterwards, Cabinet will consider the representations from tonight's meeting. And I'm not going to prejudge what Cabinet's view will be, but we do have a deadline in which to then submit a letter. And the challenge will be is we won't know what other parallel organisations who are meeting tonight, what their considerations will be either. So we've got a challenge because we know the ones that have already met, we know what their considered views are. We don't know about South Cambs who's meeting in parallel with us. So it may well be that we submit a letter. There is absolutely nothing to stop us submitting further letters and further clarification. And it may well be that leaders would like to reflect on the back of the discussions that we've had, that we may wish to do that. But I don't want to prejudge that process. But I think leaders had certainly talked about the fact that actually there is nothing to stop us providing supplementary information after the notional deadline, because actually we may feel that we can do that and it is right and proper. It is simply that actually everybody felt that it was too difficult to get to a unified position because we will not have genuinely had the opportunity to discuss that with all of you across 7 councils, and that's really important for the process. And there's an expectation that we engage the public. We don't know how that's expected. We think we should do it. We're not even at that stage. So the real challenge is this is challenging at every turn. So I hope that's answered the questions as openly as I possibly can.
Councillor Conroy, just a little question from me. We're talking about additional letters going into the future. I trust that we're all going to be appraised of what's in those letters.
So if I may, we haven't agreed we're going to do that. It's just that we're mindful we could. So if we were minded to do that, we could do something. It's an option. But no leaders have made that decision, and it might be something that we all want to reflect how these discussions have unfolded with our different councils over the last week when we next come together. It may be that there's more information we would want to provide. It may be that individual councils make that decision. The message that we were being asked to give back to government was very clear. Is there consensus amongst those of you in the area that will reorganise that you are wishing and willing to reorganise? We were very clear. That's the message we wanted to give back. Yes, we are willing to reorganise, subject to Cabinet's next meeting, but that was the message leaders were very clear about. And yes, there was a great long list of things government were hoping for, but it was a very much an open invitation of, we would quite like you to provide this. I am somewhat surprised that some authorities feel that they've been in that position that quickly to do due diligence in the way that I'm clearly hearing from members in this chamber that members in this chamber would have expected. Thank you.
Councillor Wakeford.
Thank you. I wonder if I might start just briefly on the factual question around Fenland's concerns. I know Councillor Conboy alluded to it, but I think I can quite safely say, not least because I think I've seen it covered in the press following their own extraordinary meeting last Friday, that Fenland's view was that they, or certainly leadership of Fenland's view, was that they wished to have explicitly reference that they didn't think a single county unitary was viable in the letter. And Councillor Conboy's explained why that was not felt to be an appropriate thing at this point, not least before an election when county control may change, and some members in this room may hope that it will do in whatever different ways. I think so, and if it's worth saying as well, you know, I don't think I've knowingly met anybody who does think it would be a good idea to have a single county unitary, whether or not it's written in the letter before us, which would have been my question at Fenland had I been a member there for my sins. Stepping back briefly, I think there is clearly a basic problem that government is seeking to deal with that is particularly acute in Cambridgeshire and Peterborough. Depending where you live across the county, there are up to 4 or even 5 tiers of local government, depending what you count and whether the
GCP is one you count or not. And we know that there is enormous confusion and sort of transactional costs arising from working out which council does what and how they interact. And I think I can safely say that I'm familiar with councillors across all political stripes having expressed challenges around dealing with that. I've had challenges dealing with that as a councillor, working out where precise boundaries sit and the interaction between apparently linked responsibilities. So I'm reassured, I think, from comments across the chamber that absolutely nobody is suggesting that the status quo is absolutely perfect. In fact, quite the contrary has been said. So there are certainly problems that government is national government is trying to tackle in terms of making local government that bit easier and more efficient. The challenge, as we've heard from members, therefore, I think is around the pace of that. And there are clearly challenges arising from a rapid pace of change. I don't think anyone would deny that. I certainly wouldn't deny that. I am conscious, though, there is a sort of broader analysis of the capacity of the British state, not to put it too pompously, to do things. Well, British state's pretty good at planning things and talking about things and prevaricating and litigating them. We're not so great in this country compared to a number of modern international comparators of actually sort of getting stuff done. So I think that's the challenge. Government is seeking to get stuff done by moving at a pace that make many of us uncomfortable. But as has been said, government is moving as it is, and the question is how do we engage with it? I would just challenge the suggestion that somehow we're in a minority of two in not being able to engage with government in the right way, and that everybody else is somehow all in harmony and not going to have difficulties arising from their own engagement. I'm certainly conscious that it looks like a number of other areas have sought to engage in far more detail and put in far more detailed proposals and expectations for where they think mergers might land. That's absolutely true. It's far from clear to me that they've all managed to do that in compatible directions with one another. And if it becomes apparent that they have, as Councillor Comboy says, we haven't necessarily seen everything from all other areas yet. When we do, if it becomes apparent that they have all managed to sing from exactly the same hymn sheet, then that will have been by the skin of their teeth and not without considerable risk, as Councillor Martin would I'm sure recognise, were that not to have been pulled off at the last moment. But we have a situation where there are more detailed ideas from other councils, but that don't sit compatibly with one another. And across Cambridgeshire and Peterborough, with the exception of a sentence in Fenland, we've got all of the councils of a range of different political complexions on the same page. And I don't think it's completely obvious that if government is trying to work out which areas can engage constructively together and can be trusted to come up with ideas themselves, as opposed to which areas might need political direction, for which power doesn't exist yet, but government has indicated in intention that it will take powers to gain. It's not clear to me that in other areas having different ideas set out in great detail is more likely to suggest to governments that we can be trusted to get on together than if we do manage to get behind a shared letter. So that there are clearly different sort of judgment calls there, but certainly there would be risk in us setting out why we're dug into a particular view of the world about how mergers should happen that might not be compatible with an immediate neighbour and might not be compatible with other colleagues in the system that would all need to align. So I think the jury is out in the effectiveness of potential responses, and of course leaders from across political colours represented in this chamber, I suppose specifically minus one at the end of our row, based on scale, have signed up to this approach, whether they're right or wrong. I'd just touch as well on the question Councillor Conboy addressed as well of whether we're predetermined, and whether it's a problem that we already have the letter before us for Cabinet this evening. I am conscious. I don't think in discussion so far this evening we've had a realistic alternative proposal for what members think we should do instead of send this letter now in view of the deadline. Certainly there has been suggestion that we shouldn't start from here and that we should have done something very different, and there should be much more work done across the political spectrum across Cambridgeshire and Peterborough. I haven't heard indication of that view prior to tonight, and I'm conscious that we've sought to ensure groups across the chamber were briefed on the broad direction of travel, and that doesn't appear to be a view shared in other parts of Cambridgeshire and Peterborough either. But as things stand, we've got the proposed letter. If colleagues have a proposal for something we should do differently, or would like to elaborate on how they would like us to follow up, having sent a letter as drafted, I am all ears from across the chamber, and I'm sure Cabinet will wish to pay careful attention to that when we meet afterwards. Forgive me, there was a final point of detail I'm conscious we haven't addressed, which was the Councillor's comment about districts being building blocks of new unitaries in the language of the Minister, and that's absolutely right. The ministerial letter says that broadly they envisage districts being building blocks, but that there is nothing that's come from government to suggest that they're not open to deviations from that, where there are good reasons otherwise, and this cross-party letter seeks to keep that door open, though underlines it's not desirable, which I suspect would be a shared view across the chamber. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Davenport-Ray, please.
Chair, may I ask permission to remain seated? Thank you. Many of the comments I've heard in this debate chime with a lot of my own concerns about what's in front of us. It's been really helpful to have input from all the different political groups here before Cabinet is going to meet afterwards. Firstly, I would challenge us not to use the term devolution when we are discussing this topic. What the government has proposed offers no true devolved powers to this council or whatever unitary comes after us. In fact, this is simply a reorganization of local government, and in some cases, like strategic planning, key decisions might actually be lost from our council and granted to the combined authority instead. Overall, I'm incredibly disappointed that the Labour government is forcing this process at speed upon so many councils without the processes that local democracy demand. The challenge we have before us is missing so many important elements. First, there's a lack of ability for any public consultation. Is this what local people want? Government asks us, the councils, to move at such an unnecessary speed that any consultation is nearly impossible. Second, there's a lack of common sense promoting a one-size-fits-none approach in favor of speed. Third is the most serious, a lack of evidence that local government reorganization in this form is necessary or helpful. As our Cabinet Member for Transformation, I believe our council prides itself in making decisions based on facts and evidence. Yet government has provided us with a worrying lack of evidence to support their drive for change. We have no conclusive data to show that creating unitary authorities makes local government more efficient. In fact, we have growing evidence from existing unitary councils that it increases costs in addition to requiring the extra costs of merging the councils. As Councillor Chapman described from his own experience of reorganization failures back in the annals of time when councils used carving on stone tablets to take their records. The letter from the minister included in the pack seems quite devolved from reality, honestly, taking pride in potential savings while at the same time threatening the flexible use of capital receipts. This is a veiled threat and code words for potential government-enforced fire sales of council assets, like what we're seeing now in Peterborough with the sale of so many community centres and swimming pools. The government's insistence on speed has caused real discord in other areas of the country. From speaking with my peers in Suffolk, their experience of the fast-tracked response to government has meant that the opinions of district councils have been quickly steamrolled over by upper-tier authorities with a worrying lack of due diligence. By taking our time with our Cambridgeshire partners, we are avoiding this strife between partners. Councillor Hodgson-Jones has highlighted some important questions about what government might be hoping for when they receive a letter like ours. I think he has perhaps attributed more logic and depth of thinking to MHCLG than actually exists. The minister simply wants to know if Cambridgeshire partners can work together or whether the government needs to step in. The minister's guidelines around the population size of unitaries and the preference for not splitting districts are clearly red herrings. In subsequent guidance, it's clear that these are not hard boundaries and the minister is willing to accept other solutions. I disagree with Councillor Hodgson-Jones. This is not a weak letter, but we would certainly be weak if we did not challenge the minister's unhelpful guidelines that have no basis in evidence. Councillor Hassel mentioned this reorganization also poses serious risks to our council, which government is asking us to overcome at our own risk. A full page of risks is set out in section 3 of the report that's in front of you. So we need the time to gather facts to make the best evidence-driven choices about the geographic shape of our future council. These councils need to stay financially afloat in the future, despite the government's blatant avoidance of the obvious underlying problem. That problem is the funding of social care. If the Labour government were serious about streamlining local government, this conversation would be about major investment in social care funding. We're reforming the wrong part of local government. While councils struggle to support looked-after children and vulnerable adults, this tactic is both unhelpful and uncaring. I do not believe this is the timing, format, or speed of reorganization that Cambridgeshire needs. It is unhelpful to threaten legislation and direct government action if local people decline to reorganize. I could draw the analogy of a hesitant donkey, lured by a carrot but goaded by a stick. The stick is government's threat of taking decisions out of our hands and selling our assets. The carrot in this case is a magical carrot, an imaginary cost-saving and efficiency carrot. This carrot is a government fiction based on no evidence guiding local government to avoid the true issue, the funding of social care. However, I will be a pragmatist and move forward in order to get the best outcome for our residents. I have been pleasantly surprised by the constructive cooperation that's been shown by the 7 council leaders so far in this process and their chief executives. The draft letter before us does have some positives. It shows a willingness to cooperate despite challenging timelines and a variety of different political parties involved. It shows positive signs that we and our 6 partners will base future decisions on data rather than egos or fixation on historical boundaries on a map. They haven't always been able to work together, but this is positive progress. And Councillor Gray may not know where Whittlesea is, but I certainly do. And because of this situation, the future of all residents across Cambridgeshire are now intertwined, whether we like it or not. This letter shows that we have signposted potential governance risks around the shape and size of the resulting Combined Authority Board, which I find troubling. It shows that our council, HDC, is leading the way with data analysis and showing the leadership to provide important information to all of our 7 partners. They're depending on us for much of this. This includes many of the data sets that Councillor Martin described, looking at current and future trends, considering social, political, and financial variables. We are developing a decision-making process. It's happening at the level of the 7 council leaders, but those data sets are not ready, and it would be unwise to use them to make a hasty decision simply because a letter from a minister says we should, without any legislation to back him up. I'm most proud that the letter put before us shows that Cambridgeshire partners are not willing to move faster just to meet arbitrary government deadlines. Councillor Martin asked why we think our area is different to the many areas across the country that have agreed to fast-track their changes. The simple answer is that Cambridgeshire is both cautious and brave. We should be proud of what Councillor Gray calls our Cambridgeshire holding pattern. We are willing to stand up for our residents and take the time to make a good decision rather than simply make a quick decision. Overall, I wish the Labour government had taken the time and care required to usher in a truly devolved and streamlined local government, that kept local people as the absolute focus of all of our work. But I'm minded to support the draft letter before us, and I'm encouraged to continue working with our 6 partners towards a more detailed geographic proposal, of which all of us will see before it's approved or submitted anywhere by November of this year. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Lowe, please.
Thank you, Chair. I was just wondering, can we not actually put what each council's thoughts are at this time and put a caveat in that obviously this is still in transition, we're still thinking about it, but for now, this is what our thoughts are on who we would want to go into partnership with, for want of a better word.
Thank you. Councillor Hodgson-Jones again, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just wanted to pick up on a couple of points in the leader's response to my questions, which was about which Councillor Wakeford mentioned again, and secondly about the role of the strategic authority and the mayor. If I understand your answer correctly, there is no plan to change the role of the combined authority mayor. And if that is the case, then no council district within Cambridgeshire can agree a unitary structure with a combined another authority council outside the boundaries of the combined authority, because you cannot have a combined authority that does not cover the same area as its constituent members. So in effect, if the feedback is that the mayoralty is not open to change in terms of the boundary of the strategic authority, then there is no opportunity for us to extend and look at partnerships across the county boundary. Yeah, then that is very disappointing. And my final point was that if we're cognizant of, the point is that the minister's letter had a lot of very specific questions, and only one of those questions that was responded to was about the boundaries and saying that we might consider changing the boundaries of districts. Now, I'm fine if we consider doing that, but we have to recognise that is incompatible with the timeline imposed by government. And unless we believe that we can change that timeline, that is a red herring.
Thank you. Councillor Ross Martin. Oh, sorry, Councillor Conboy, please. Yeah.
Can I just offer a point of clarification? I think it will help. So to be really clear, tonight we're talking about local government reorganisation. The mayoralty is part of the devolution package. Now, the mayoralty will change because it will become a strategic mayoral authority. It isn't at the moment. It's a combined mayoral authority. So it will change, and government have set out those different tiers. So it will move to the upper tier. The boundary for the combined authority is a separate conversation. So I understand that the mayoralty may well be having conversations broader, but the reason that's not before you tonight is because we are being very clear. We are doing local government reorganisation. In parallel, there is a bit of happening around devolution. It's hard enough to get local government reorganisation to this point. Devolution is happening, if you like, that conversation is happening in parallel, but we are not being required to provide any information at this stage. So that's why the letter is silent on it, because it would not be appropriate. And equally, that's still a set of very loose conversations which may go nowhere. Can I just come back to the clarity around what ministers have said and what they have not? Civil servants and ministers have offered a number of briefings since December to chief execs and to elected leaders. It would be fair to say that there has been some inconsistency between each of those briefings, because every time a question is asked, somebody responds to the question. It's sort of an iterative process. Letters have been issued, but if you read those letters from the minister very carefully, whilst they often give a direction of travel, they often say in the next sentence, but none of this is fixed in stone. I'm paraphrasing. So whilst it's saying there's a rough approximate size of an authority, and people have sort of said, well, we must adhere to that, and if you cut Cambridgeshire and Peterborough, this is how you must do it if that's your boundaries, as in the 500,000. Equally, in the next breath, we've been told, but there may be exceptions to that if there is a good case. It's the same with our boundaries. We know that if we start changing boundaries, that's incredibly problematic. But as leaders have said they are open to looking at solutions which work for residents. Do any of us think that moving the boundaries is probably a solution that we are all comfortable with? I think the answer is probably not, but I can't put words into the mouth of my fellow leaders. Do I think it's a good idea? Probably not. But I am open to looking at data and looking at options because I'm genuinely interested in trying to get the best configuration that we genuinely believe is in Huntingdonshire's residents' interest and the residents' interests across the bigger area. So I understand the angst of why we say something with one hand and then we don't quite match up. We are being given guidance and then being told, but actually there may be cases which would allow you to put a case which is different. We have embraced that as leaders, and we've said, okay, rather than doing a quick and dirty, if you make it this number, you put this one and this one together, that comes up with the magic number, that's clearly the solution, that's what we'll go with. We've said that we don't want to do that because we don't think that's in everybody's interest. We equally think as leaders on behalf of all of you that you will clearly probably have very different views on that. So to reassure you, we are open to what comes next, and I think that's fair to say of all of the leaders on behalf of the authorities. I'm certainly open to what comes next. We've talked very much about being data-driven. There will come a point where the data may tell us that there are several options, and we then may have to use other ways of making those decisions. But I would rather that we took our time and we made some informed decisions than make a knee-jerk now that we live to regret simply because we thought we were answering the minister's questions. I think it is prudent, and I think all the council leaders to a certain extent are quite brave. We have decided it would be better not to be bounced. That's my word for it, not others. It would be better to make an informed decision rather than a quick one that we live to regret because we tried to please a timescale that we just don't think we can meet. I hope that gives reassurance. I understand the angst. If this was dead easy, we would have sat down as 7 leaders and said, we've got the answer. There's only one answer and it looks like this. There isn't only one answer. It is not going to be easy. It is going to be difficult to come to a determination that we can all feel comfortable with. And there may be an element of compromise for all of us. Because I suspect if, again, you've seen in the letter is very clear. Would we have started from this place? No. Would we be doing this if we were not being asked to? No. That's very easy for all of us to agree to, but we are clear if we are going to do it, we would like to make the best set of proposals on behalf of all of our authorities rather than the quick and maybe simplistic ones that we could come up with dead easy, but they may be the wrong configurations for the wrong reasons. We'd rather get this right and take the time to get it right. I hope that reassures people, but I am hearing the angst and the concern about lack of control. Chair, I'm really conscious of time because we're already at 8:20 and I better be quiet.
Thank you. On that note, I'll ask the remaining speakers to be a little bit brief if they can. Thank you very much. I'd like to call in Councillor Ross-Martin again, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll be as brief as possible. To answer Councillor Wakeford directly, what we were hoping to see tonight was an actual response to the government letter outlining all the points and all the questions that they gave to us, not a bland and weak letter, as Councillor Hodson-Jones quite eloquently put it. Had the executive decided to write a letter to the minister asking them to clarify some of the points, because in front of me I have a reply that Devon County Council received when they asked for some clarity, and it says the interim plans are not final proposals and therefore are not a decision point. Interim plans should capture progress on developing proposals in line with the criteria and demonstrating how councils are working together. It is there as a checkpoint to show direction and momentum. It is not a decision point. It is to show the direction in which we are travelling. The plans may describe one or more potential proposals for an area if there are several options under consideration by different councils and where there is no consensus. So saying that we couldn't all agree on one proposal is not good enough as far as I'm concerned. And then the point about the elections in May, the Minister, Jim McMahon, also says that we recognise that in May there'll be a change in position after the local elections. They recognise that, but the proposals, the interim plan that was to be put forward on Friday were not the final decision points. So we were able to change them if the change of the authority, if the decision and the thinking of the new authority was different. This wasn't a final proposal. It is an interim proposal showing everyone the direction of travel which we're going in, so everyone is clear where we're heading. This letter does not do that at all. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Hassel.
Thank you, Chair. Just firstly to apologise to Councillor Davenport-Ray if I in any way gave the impression that there were no risk analysis in the papers. The note that I sent out earlier on in the week clearly stated that political risks had been omitted, which are a bit of an elephant in the room because there's incredibly political challenges here, which is why really to answer Councillor Wakeford's alternative proposals, I thought the note that I sent out on Monday, given the amount of time that we had to look at the information, was pretty close to a proposal with some very clear mitigation strategies to address the political risk, which also addresses Councillor Comboy's point, which is how difficult it is if you don't take a dispassionate risk management approach with some very clear metrics. It's always going to be difficult to get agreement. I also think that this gathering of data, yes, there are some, gathering data, absolutely, we've got to have lots and lots of different data, but there are some really, really clear sort of economic measures that we can use that we should have, I think, agreed, and maybe we can do that going forward, just agree with the other partners some really big metrics, like the financial risk metrics that we can actually use, that we all agree on. So you only need like half a dozen. You don't need every single little metric, which is just going to kick the can down the road. We could have done far better, I think. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Chapman.
Thank you. One thing I did mean to say earlier on is that I'm here to represent my residents and my electors and Huntingdonshire. And so when we look at going speed dating with other authorities, then I think that we need to consider our residents and our residents' interests. Not all authorities are equal, and some of us, our residents over many years, have contributed to the financial position of this authority, and other authorities have not operated in the same way. So I think that we need to view this from the point of view that our authority, our residents' money, what we have here, and we need to strike a deal with another authority which is fair to our residents, and not just be looking at the whole of Cambridgeshire. And I know the leader agrees with me on this.
Thank you. In view of the time, would nobody else please put their hand up? We've got 3 more speakers, and could they be rather quick, please? Thank you very much. Right, the next speaker is Councillor Wakeford.
Thank you. Only briefly, if I may. I did hear that sigh from the back of the room. More sighs than Councillor Chapman got as well, so I should reflect on that one. I'm sure. Councillor Martin drew attention again to, forgive me, Councillor Hassel, who is also called Martin. Councillor Hassel drew attention to again to his earlier email. I interpreted from that a range of factors that I think absolutely rightly we would wish to be considering as we're further down the road in following the direction of travel set out in the letter. So I take that as sort of elaborating rather than an alternative to the proposal that we've got. I hope I've understood that correctly. Councillor Martin, the correct Councillor Martin this time, did just, I think, hit the nail on the head in reiterating that what government seems to be interested in is for reassurance that we're rolling in the same direction, not that we're at an end point already. I completely concur with that. I think the point about the comparisons with other areas is that where they've rolled a great deal further, put much more detail and evidence and judgment about where they'd like to end up in the public domain. What at least some areas have managed to do is make transparently obvious that they're in fact rolling in very different directions, even though they will need to engage together and come up with shared agreements. So the fact that we have got less far because we've put a lot of effort into engaging cross-party across all of the councils within Cambridgeshire and Peterborough to come up with a framework for proceeding on the basis of a shared evidence base, not our own sort of selected evidence that we think makes our a particular case is a different approach. But I would reiterate a suggestion that it's not necessarily worse in answering the exam question for us. I think Councillor Devonport-Ray raised a number of points, which not least around pace, which I touched upon earlier, which members will be reassured I won't repeat. I think, as Councillor Comboy did draw attention to, though, we do have guidance from government which does spell out the general expectation, but scope for deviation from that, not least as we've discussed around 500,000 populations, around districts as units, or anything else. So the idea that what government has given us isn't right, I would challenge. 500,000 but exceptions otherwise, where there's good reason, is spelled out in the white paper itself. Finally, I will just note, Councillor Devonport-Ray, I don't think made explicit who the donkey was in her analogy. I do wonder if that was to save some of our blushes, but I think I think that was an image I'll take home.
Thank you, Councillor Lowe.
Thank you. I obviously was a bit too quick with my last question, so I will repeat. It was a question for the leader, Councillor Comboy. We need to put in the letter of reply what each council's thoughts are at this time, with a caveat, obviously, stating that we are in discussions or in transition and that this will change. But I think it would be prudent that each council's thoughts would be in the letter. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Comboy.
If I may, so whilst that's a very worthy suggestion, and I think it's a very interesting suggestion, the practicalities are the time in which to conduct this. Councillors have already gone through this process ahead of us, so they have not agreed that and they will not have had that discussion. So to add that at this stage is not going to be practical. But there is nothing to stop us, as I've already indicated, that if councils having gone through this and leaders reflecting back on the feedback that they've had from each of the councils, if we wish to submit something extra, there is nothing to stop us doing that. So the answer is no, we won't be able to do that, and certainly not within the timescales in a single letter that we would all agree, because actually that's not helpful. It's been made really clear by me and by others, I think, in the debate, that actually what government is asking is, are we agreed on what we want to work together on? If as soon as we get into that level of detail at this stage, you will get 7 different answers. That probably won't communicate the message to government that we are working collectively. It will say, we are working, but we have no agreement. The leaders have been very clear. We would like to get as close to agreement as possible, if it is possible. We think it could be, but we won't know until we go through this process and you go through that process with us, with our residents. So the answer is no, but that doesn't mean that we couldn't at a later point if we wished.
Thank you. And finally, Councillor Gray.
It's very kind of you, Chair, to give me a second, very small bite of the cherry. I think Councillor Chapman gave an interesting taste of what is to come, because he does hit, I'm afraid, on the nub of some of the issues, which is who's bringing what to the party here. And I know that you speak as a proud St Neots resident who feels that 1974 did you down when you became part of Huntingdonshire. It's going to be a long, long time before I forget about the magic carrot. So I want to thank Councillor Davenport Ray for that gift. But I sit on my serious point to the leader. I do understand the challenges that she's had to get to this point. I do appreciate everything that has been said in defence of the letter. Nobody was expecting you to come here with everything nailed down. Nobody wanted you to come, frankly, because we haven't had the discussion ourselves, wanted you to come here saying this is the answer. But I think the points that we would like the Cabinet to dwell on is that it's far too general. And I think there would have been better ways of expressing, for example, how do you think you're going to be consulting with the residents? What weight does that carry at the end of the day? And that's a powerful point that I think has been made around and across this chamber. So it feels very light touch in that respect. And, I appreciate that we haven't put forward an alternative response, but I don't think we were, being called upon to do this. As a Cabinet decision at the end of the day. This is the letter that you're going to sign up to or being asked to sign up to. So we're responding to what is put in front of us at this point in time. But, Councillor Davenport Ray again said that we're a brave county. I'm a proud person who's lived in Huntingdonshire and Cambridgeshire all their life, but I do feel that we miss many, many opportunities as a county. We've got a world-class university on our doorstep, and yet too often in local government, both at district and at county level, we have failed abysmally really to deliver. And when you look around our county and you look around what we've delivered, it's not a great record considering the resources that sit just a few miles down the road from here. So, I really do hope that, if you think this is a brave decision, fine. The judgment will be there for us to see in the next few months. So thank you, Cabinet, for listening to us for a long time. And I think this gives a flavour of the interest that there is amongst communities, amongst councillors, and a flavour of where we're going to be going in the future. So thank you.
Thank you, members, for your contributions this evening. Council duly notes the report to be considered by the Cabinet and proposed letter to be submitted to government. This brings us to the end of our agenda, and with that I thank you all for your attendance and contributions this evening. The Cabinet meeting will follow shortly. May I remind members that the next meetings of the Council are scheduled for a week today, where there will be an extraordinary meeting to convey the titles of Honorary Alderman to former Councillors Tyso and West, and then the normal scheduled Council meeting. These meetings will begin at 7 o'clock. With that, I declare the meeting closed.